just as we're going through this conversation, if there's, do you guys prefer snapping or like a hand raise? What I'm trying to do is more of like a quick survey just in terms of some of these questions. So if they're resonating with you, go ahead and do a hand raise or a snap just so that I know I'm on the right track with where it is that you want this conversation to go. That's a pretty easy way of doing it. But why don't we go ahead and actually start with introductions? I'll start with myself. I'm a mechanical engineer. I got my MBA at Babson College. I am a multi-engine rated pilot. I've also got two ventures. One of them is a hardware venture as well as a software venture. And I have a specialization in hardware manufacturing. Vic, why don't you take it away?
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Vic Innocent. I come with an engineering background, mostly electrical engineering. I worked for NASA. I've built instruments for Oxford University and many other universities as well. I, um, I'm the investment chair for FinTech at a local VC in Boston, Ares Capital. And I love all things hardware for the other VC, Frankenbuild Ventures, as well.
All right, Ben.
Hi, Ben Schlacke. I'm an operating partner in a venture capital fund in Boston called Material Impact Fund. We invest in businesses that have some material science advantage, typically that build fully integrated products around that material science capability. But prior to that, I was an entrepreneur for 12 years, and I built a company called MC10, which was a early pioneer in the wearable sensing markets, which became part of a large French company called Dassault Systèmes in October of 2020. Nice to meet you guys.
Yes. All right. So just as we get kind of into the conversation a little bit, can I get an idea of the stage of the ventures that you guys are working on? Do we have founders that are here? Excellent.
awesome.
In terms of the product development, are you guys early stage? Have you launched your product or are you late stage? Early stage. Excellent. Okay. That's where we're going to start. So how can environmental engineering be incorporated into a startup at an early stage? Who wants to take it away? Vic, you want to start? You're giving me this look.
I'm giving the look because I love very big, open-ended questions. How do we incorporate environmental? Say it again.
How can environmental engineering be incorporated into a startup at an early stage? You might want to take it from your investing perspective, just as these founders are looking to try and get funding here in the near future.
Yeah. When it comes to investing, especially kind of wowing everyone, essentially when I say we, I'm talking about everyone in the investing community. We do want to see that any kind of engineering prowess, whether it's specific to solar or specific to wind or specific to X, Y, and Z, that it's really actually ingrained in your mission and your vision. I know that sounds kind of fluffy, but the idea is that we really want to make sure that your entire product line, your entire vision of your company does have sustainability, does have environmental benefits, ingrained into like the nitty gritty, the decision making of should you push forward on this product versus this other line, versus should you engage on a certain partnership. It all is stemmed from kind of the tree trunk of your mission and your vision. So I wouldn't say just, pester all of the green words in your mission and vision. But when you're speaking to investors, understand that they have a thesis in mind. No matter what they say to you, they do have a thesis in mind. And you want to present your endeavor as something that already falls within the confines of what they're looking for, especially when it comes to environmental engineering. We're always reading all of these reports like IPCC reports or latest McKinsey reports talking about the green revolution or the blue revolution. You have to be up to date with where the state of affairs are on anything. If you're looking towards understanding, let's say, particles that are for infrastructure development and air capture particles, understand some of the statistics for this city and globally. You just want to be able to have those big conversations, even if you're not directing an investor towards we need to raise X an amount of money in X number of days. Just be able to have that big conversation, and investors will want to have another conversation with you, and another and another.
And did you want to answer the question as well, Ben, or do you want to?
Oh, pardon me.
Actually, I would not like to follow that superb answer. It was a fantastic answer.
All right. And I just want to kind of recap that a little bit as well,
Sure,
Vic.
yeah.
So what you're telling me is that if the product itself actually has an environmental impact, then
Mhm.
completely market it, especially talk about it with the investors as well.
Mhm.
But if your sustainability or if there's kind of a climate process that actually gets put into the value add,
Mhm.
and it's just a perk,
Mhm.
then focus more on the core product instead of the perk itself, especially with the conversation.
Yeah, I kind of like your use of the word perk, because I would say if your business is looking for investors where environmental or green or blue is at the core of their thesis, you should never frame your business as this has a perk of. They want to know that this is truly part of what you're doing. So I love that you mentioned it may not be you may not have a specific project or a specific product for it, but make sure that you let the investors and everyone else understand that the entire mission of the organization has green at its soul, or has something very specific, not just very generalized green, we're green, or we like sustainability. Be very direct in how the entire organization is mindful of these goals. That's one reason why I mentioned being up read up on latest reports, because you never know what you can tie your business to the global scale via a report.
Excellent. All right. So Ben, where can I find climate tech or clean energy resources for engineers and developers, specifically here in the Boston area?
Oh,
Nice.
there's quite a large ecosystem, and I'm sure I can't list all of them off. But I think, for example, Greentown Labs in Cambridge, I think, is an excellent resource for anyone starting a company that has a product or service that has a sustainability angle to it. They have a lot of both literature and support resources for early stage companies, but ultimately they can host you in their space as well, which I think has the added benefit of not just great lab space that they provide, but also a sense of community. I was just in there the other day, and I was struck by like how many 1-person to 5-person companies were resident in several football fields of warehouse space, but the energy almost felt like a collective. And I think, being an entrepreneur is very, very lonely in the early days. So finding yourself in communities of like-minded people, even if they, are not directly related to your venture, can be really helpful from a resource perspective as you go the journey of building a great product or service.
I actually want to kind of touch on the community aspect as well. How important is it for founders to actually find a community, especially at the early stage? So a lot of, and just from my experience working with founders and actually referring them to investors, a lot of early stage founders or founders that are raising for the first time are so concerned about their intellectual property and sharing kind of that secret sauce during these conversations. So how important is it to actually have these discussions with other founders that may be in a similar space, with them to be able to actually flesh out these ideas?
I think at this moment in time, 2023, there's an enormous amount of secondary literature and research that you can get access to. When I started my company in 2008, the New England Venture Capital Association didn't publish, term sheets and what like a great deal looks like that you can just sort of look at and then sit with an investor and say, I want it to sort of look like this. That didn't exist in 2008. That exists now. I don't think that should be the beginning of the journey, though. I think community is incredibly important from a couple perspectives. Number one, there's still a lot of softer, subjective aspects of building a venture and raising money, which if you can interact with other founders who've had experiences with investors, they can steer you towards the ones they had a positive experience, maybe steer you away from the ones that were, less positive and or not meeting the need of the entrepreneur at that moment, deploying capital. I think for the enterprise, there's a lot of benefits to community because sitting down the street or the next block might be another talented mechanical engineer that's non-competitive, working on a completely different kind of product. And you'd be surprised, like you have lunch with somebody and you sort of just talk about, oh, having so much trouble making the robot go left versus right. And they might just have like an interesting idea, or can refer you to somebody that specializes in such a problem. And then I personally believe at the ecosystem level, most of the important ventures that are going to really make an impact on the Boston community, Massachusetts, the United States, globally, are going to take a pretty large collection of supporting actors outside of the four walls of the company. And so interacting with potential customers, potential collaborators, channels to market, and particularly deep tech oriented ventures is really important. And all of that at different levels speaks to embedding yourself both directly and virtually in like-minded communities.
Hmm.
Yeah. I'll even add a little bit with that. I like that you mentioned that with some of the larger issues that need to be solved, especially globally, you will not be able to do it alone. So you may as well be talking with each other. As an example, in the space economy, specifically for launching or launch vehicles, many of the actors in startup all know each other and they do talk to each other. So they understand that they are competitors. That's, not a secret, but they also understand that they have to work together. And so be aware that yes, you should be a little bit, you should have ownership of your IP. Make sure it's in the pipeline, getting registered, so on and so forth. But appreciate that larger issues that need to be solved, you will have to hold hands. There's no way against it.
I have a couple of questions in regards to that. So one of the ventures that I'm working on right now, it's really interesting because these conversations, it is such a small community in terms of some of these problems. I mean, they're beefy problems, and the small community, the tight knit community, is also with the investors as well.
Yeah.
So just as you guys are actually going for funding, one of the things that you'll find is that you'll have a conversation with here Vic, who might talk to Ben. But there's also a few other investors that are behind them as well in their network that are also chatting about your business as well.
Yeah.
So in regards to that, how cognizant do founders need to be in terms of actually making a good first impression? Or more specifically, how should they position themselves in terms of actually starting those conversations as they start to raise funds?
I think those are two different things. So let's separate them. I think how you show up is really important. And by the way, I think it's just as important for an investor to show up well to a meeting
Good point,
with a
yeah.
founder, because if they don't, I think that is just as obvious and can be just as damaging to a future relationship.
I love that you
I
said that.
think it's super important the way you show up. First impressions matter a lot. And, at least in the Boston community, it's a pretty small one. You may end up raising capital from other regions, but typically if you're raising your first money, be it angel money or seed money from an institutional investor, a lot of people talk. So it's pretty important how you show up. I think that's different than the other question, which is how do you position yourself in that conversation is different. But be prepared, like be action oriented, some of the more qualitative but important things. You want to comment on the second piece?
How to position yourself. Honestly, positioning yourself is having those conversations and recognizing, just as Ben said, a conversation with me is more than likely going to be a conversation with my network as well. That includes investors in the Boston area, that includes investors in the New Hampshire area. And so anyone in my vicinity who has a thesis that, oh yeah, I heard of a great company creating fans. Even though I am interested in investing, I may actually also share that kind of knowledge with other people as well. So positioning yourself is really about being open to those conversations, and also appreciate that ultimately this is a question of essentially, will you give me money? But that doesn't have to be the bulk of the conversation at step one. Step one is letting both parties know that we do have a vested interest in having this conversation now and continuing the conversation. Term term sheets and whatnot will come or not. But step one is saying, my company does this. My company will be doing this. And my company has done this. Let people know what you are doing, period.
Yeah, it sounds kind of obvious, but I'll just use myself as an example. Like when I was 22 years old and I got my first job interview, it turned out to be the one I really wanted, which was a terrible, terrible sequencing. Like, in other words, I did very poorly in the interview because it was like the first time I interviewed when I got out of school. And I find sometimes that, entrepreneurs, as they're building their fundraising track, be it with angel investors or early stage seed investors, kind of wing it, to be honest. And I think, as an example, I was having a conversation with Justin a few days ago about his business, and it was so clear that he had probably practiced and just gotten feedback on what he was talking about at least 200 times before, we had the opportunity to discuss it. And that's actually the exception to the rule. That's usually not the case. So I would just say practice, 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 as it relates to how you show up in those conversations on the first impression thing. Don't take your most important meeting as the first one.
So just as an anecdote, the 200 times that you're talking about, I actually practiced my pitch 200 times by riding chairlifts at a local ski hill. And so every time I got onto a chairlift with a different person, I would pitch them this product. And so every 10 seconds or 15 seconds, I would get someone who would say, please stop talking. Don't pitch me this product anymore. And after about the 100th time, I started to resonate. And I could actually tell just by their facial expressions that I was actually hitting home, which is exactly where the practice is actually coming in. So actually going back to the conversation that we were talking about, remember when we were saying that, sustainability could become a perk just in terms of the product? Don't pitch the perk.
Yes.
Pitch the core product.
Yeah.
So this question goes more towards how can I pivot towards a more sustainable engineering or development model,
Okay.
especially to fit your investment thesis?
If we're kind of doing an audit very generally, I would say look towards your supply chain. That's almost number one that I want any entrepreneur to look at. Additionally, you can look at materials as well, but I would almost always say a lot of the money that your company ends up using is in product development, and a lot of that will be not invested, be tied into supply chain. Who else are you sourcing from for nuts, for bolts? Where are they being sourced from? The materials? Are you creating things in-house? Are you doing this via a partnership somewhere else? I think that's step one. But to be honest, I can answer that question in more detail for a specific business in mind. So I'll give a general answer of anyone should always start looking at their supply chain. If you're looking to green your entire company, start there.
I agree, hands down. The greenhouse gas emissions in the supply chain, just in general, from a logistical perspective, is huge.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious. So one thing that I will say, so I'm going to go ahead and actually give you guys the pitch that I gave Ben and Vic the other day. So my product, it's called Right Fan. What we did is we created a 25% more energy efficient CPU cooling fan for data centers and cryptocurrency miners. And the thing that we did that makes the 25% energy efficiency is we moved the electric motor from the center to the outside. So the fan is on the interior of the motor, and we're opening the door, not at the door hinge, but at the door handle. So utilizing torque and leverage as a way of getting that energy efficiency. I see the question on your face.
I love a good question. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that we've been facing just in terms of our product development is we're working with a contract manufacturer right now. And one of the things that they keep mentioning is the logistics. So as we start to run through manufacturing, what are some of the key things that investors look at as I'm starting this manufacturing process?
Do you want to try this one?
You go ahead.
So when it comes to logistics, what do investors want to hear? Is that the question?
Yes. So remember, I'm starting this manufacturing.
Yeah.
It's a huge capital burn. So I've got a couple questions in regards to
Sure.
just saying, how should I actually capitalize the manufacturing process? One, and then two, what is it that you guys are looking for from a founder perspective to make sure that I'm ready to actually do the manufacturing?
Oh,
Okay. So step one is always going to be a little bit of homework on who you're speaking with. Don't be creepy or anything, but you do want to know what that person has already invested in or is looking to invest in. So when it comes to manufacturing, some people specifically are very gung ho about, oh, I heard about the CHIPS Act and I want all of my next investments to be USA made. Well, you need to understand that when you speak to them to say, a core component of the heat capacitance of this fan is specifically manufactured in Milwaukee or something. You start the conversation there. Of course, the investor knows, sometimes every single part of the manufacturing will be within their bounds, but you want to start with that little nugget to kind of get them interested so that they know the conversation, or at least the next sentence of the conversation, is going to be fruitful no matter what. Right? You did
sure.
kind of perk up.
So
Sorry.
this is a specific comment to businesses that are building a product and they have to manufacture it. And if I understood the question, like how do you capitalize and think about manufacturing at scale, I would separate like your first few prototypes from I'm actually going to deploy investor capital into building many units for a fan, as an example. And on the prototype side, I'd be really, really scrappy. Try to by hook or by crook figure out how to build an exemplar of what you're building for the cheapest amount possible, so there's a physical thing. Investors tend to, as it relates to the other topic, like where and how are we going to capitalize our manufacturing capability, tend to be a little allergic because it's extremely expensive capital in your early days, cost of capital. And it's extremely expensive to make stuff, even if it's a fan going into a computer. The overall cost of building that at volume is very expensive. So I would say evidence of product market fit is really important before you go to the second phase. I think you can do a lot of iterations and practice in the first phase of building prototypes, but when you're going to deploy millions of dollars usually to build something in volume, having either signed LOIs from customers or some evidence that you nailed it in terms of like what you're building. With the appreciation, you're always going to iterate, and improvement is really important. I didn't do that. I spent a lot of money before I actually had it right. And I think I had to go back and do a lot of design changes and ultimately improve the manufacturing process for my product. And I wished I had, before I had spent that first round of money trying to build something in volume in China, I had figured out like, oh, this is really the thing. And a lot of people skip that step.
Yeah. And this may not affect you and your business because you're beyond the ideation stage. You're far ahead. But for anyone who's at the ideation stage, I would implore you to be aware, just like what he said, start as cheap as possible, but also don't be afraid of simulations as well. Go to your local university, go to find any organization that will hook you up with some kind of CAD, because investors want to see the product physically. But if you cannot, we need to see how it would work. The reason I mentioned this is because often founders will say, I can't build the prototype because I don't have the money. And I don't have the money until the investors give me the money. And that is actually very, very true. It's an equation and it's true. However, in order to get the money, you kind of have to show the product. So not only product market fit, but if you do not have access to injection molding, if you do not have all of these things, either reach out in a collaboration or reach out to universities. I say universities because we're literally in a university right now for core facilities, or at least at the bare minimum, look to try to find how to make a proper simulation. And that will start your conversation more than you may think, because otherwise it's just a notepad and a dream.
Absolutely. So just to give you guys a couple of creative solutions that I've been hearing from other founders, one of the things that I've been trying to do for founders is how do I decrease the R&D expense at the very beginning of this process? So you may be during the ideation stage and you're thinking about actually creating a prototype, but you want to validate it using something like CFD, computational fluid dynamics. So at MIT, that would be a perfect instance of actually utilizing the university. However, as a team, you could go two routes. One of them is a prototype house. Typically, they'll charge you about $60,000 to actually generate a prototype for your idea. That comes with a ton of engineering, documentation, CFD, all of the the whole works. But if you go to a school like MIT or another engineering institution like Georgia Tech, it's typically around $5,000 to $10,000. The only problem is the timeline. It's about 9 months because you're talking about a senior design course instead. But you're still able to actually move forward in terms of the product development to make that happen. The second thing that I want to talk about in terms of the creative aspects. So think about funding as you're starting to look at manufacturing or even developing these prototypes. Before this conversation, I was telling Ben that we're moving into our second generation prototype, and we're actually developing 60 destructive prototypes so that we can do reliability testing for our customer. That's about $200,000 and about 12 to 18 months of work. So how do I actually capitalize, or how do I actually fund that? One, Ben has actually talked about how you received venture capital, right? For the first round. So I don't want to do that, because then it's giving equity away to someone that I'm not sure if I need to actually give equity away to. So the way that we're doing it is we're capitalizing using equipment leasing through a private equity firm.
Nice.
So you can actually get equipment leasing through a bank, which is the traditional route, or you can actually go through a non-traditional route like private equity. Private equity can take on additional risk, but because I'm putting my manufacturing process or my IP or my trade secret into the equipment, they're super excited about it, because then they can resell it just in case everything goes awry. The second thing is the raw materials. The raw materials I have to capitalize using a traditional VC route. There's really no other way that I can get around it. Banks are not going to loan me the money, and I haven't found a way to actually make that happen in a more creative fashion. So there's a venture capital route, and then there's a venture debt route, which I'm also trying to figure out in terms of a balance act. And then the third way is, how do I actually do not just the first batch of manufacturing, but the second batch of manufacturing? So how do I roll the process? Because I'm going to spend all that money through the VC. So the third is factor financing. I'll take the PO, take it to the bank. They'll give me 90% of the PO, but take 10%. And I can actually roll that into the raw materials for the second manufacturing process. And I can delay paying as much as I possibly can to actually get the product out the door. So that's the creative
Those are
way.
really, really good ideas. There might be a third one that occurred to me as you were going through those really good suggestions. Depending on the nature of your product, today it's very standard that large corporations have innovation arms that by definition spend between $25,000 and $250,000 on pilots and projects to build an ecosystem of innovation outside of their four walls. And they don't always do that in equity. Sometimes they'll just do it. But is, if you're not giving them shares in your company for that money, they're probably going to ask, like, let's use Justin's example, for some rights around the output of the project if it's of interest to them. So if they were NVIDIA and they said, look, turns out we put a lot of chips into systems that ultimately go into data centers, and we think that your fan could be a game changer. They may say, we'll give you the $250,000 to do that, but we're going to ask for some preferential rights on your fan for use cases that we care about, which, depending on the nature of your product, might be a creative way of not giving up equity. not having to, deal with debt from a bank. But nothing comes for free. You'll have to give up something. If your business can tolerate that, that's an interesting way to go about it too.
Did you want to add something?
Just a little one. I do love the nothing comes for free because it is absolutely true. Even in a benevolent exchange, there is some exchange. So I'll also remind people that if you're, many of us are in engineering and we're building software and hardware technologies. I would say if you're going the SBIR or STTR routes as well, please be aware that the government does want you to commercialize the technology, but they do also have a vested stake in your IP as well. So please read, read, and read, and read again, because nothing is 100% benevolent. It's not to be shifty. It's just that people aren't always aware of the opportunities of their product line, or the entire company. But other actors may have larger visions, such as what Ben had mentioned with an institution or CVCs that may be interested in your product.
One conversation that I had this week actually was with Intel, their CBC arm.
Mhm.
So they're willing to actually give out capital with no equity,
Yes.
which is crazy. I had to ask a ton of questions because I wasn't understanding exactly what the long-term vision was there.
Yeah.
And the guy was saying,
They do own your kids, though.
not
Kidding. I'm
not
kidding.
necessarily the kids. Well, I was thinking more about the IP actually.
Yeah.
So
Oh, the other baby.
yeah, the
Your
other
IP.
baby.
The other baby.
So they don't take anything from you, but if they do give you money, they're expecting you to answer their phone call. That's pretty important to hear.
Yeah.
If you're taking money from Intel, they're there in terms of a community perspective that's holistic. They want you to be able to actually have that conversation in the future in case of your growth. And so what Intel will do is they'll wrap in your products and actually try to do a collaboration with theirs as well,
Yeah.
which is huge.
Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to hear some anecdotes from you before we actually turn this over to questions. So are there a couple of anecdotes about founders that you've worked with in the past in terms of sustainable engineering? Something that might be of interest in terms of these early stage startups that are listening to us right now.
An anecdote.
It could be geared towards manufacturing, or maybe it's a conversation that actually led you to say, oh, okay, we need to talk about a term sheet, like that pivotal moment in saying, oh, wow, that was such a good pitch.
Yeah. I'm thinking of, so I remember conversing with two companies in particular that were in biochar, and they were looking for manufacturing at scale biochar in the Southeast Asian region. And it was somewhat during the conversation that I recognized one of the two biochar companies weren't actually aware of the global um, uh, foothold that India had in this particular type of biochar that they were creating. And so this was a moment where they're fantastic for their small region.
Yeah.
But unless you are fully aware of all of your competitors, and your competitors are also going to be within your landscape as well as outside your landscape, as well as, well, what else can the customer do? The customer can just not buy any of it. That's also your competitor. But long story short is it was a moment of realization of when the term sheet could change. Like, this could be funded, but now I'm thinking this is funded for local expansion. They could dominate this local market, as opposed to this is now going to be, or they're engineering the product that they were going to engineer. I'm trying not to say too much about what company it was, but the product that they're going to engineer is going to be something industry revolutionary. I know now that it cannot be industry revolutionary because they cannot have that strong foothold against the Indian market for that specific type of biochar. But I saw it as a new opportunity for them to not completely redirect, but like truly focus on what they can do now and in the next 3, 5, and 10 years within their region. So that's one anecdote.
Very cool. Ben, do you have a story for us?
Yeah, I can share maybe one or two examples of companies in our portfolio now that I'm in love with. That just maybe on the larger point of, in this particular moment in time, if you're building an enterprise that has an impact focus, it's very easy as a founder when you're starting that journey to really focus on the big mission. I mean, it motivates people, it motivates investors, motivates your customers, but that can often get in the way of some of the really important basics that you can't skip. So as an example, product market fit. You can't say, I'm going to clean up the oceans because a blue world is a better world without really understanding like your product. We have a company called Fleet Robotics, and this CEO founder has done such a fantastic job of refining a specification for a robot that will crawl down the side of a large tanker and kind of like a Roomba with magnets, basically clean the entire tanker and remove biofouling. So fuel efficiency goes up, carbon emissions go down, shipping can avoid taxes. And he's got it down to the spot where he can tell you, if you tell him how big the boat is, he can tell you exactly how long it's going to take for two of these, Fleet Robotics products. I call them Aqua Roombas, but he hates that, to basically, clean the entire boat. And he's like basically lived in shipyards for the last 8 months to do that. Now, if you get him over a cup of coffee, he'll tell you that like he grew up around the ocean, he studied marine biology, and he is completely committed to the notion of cleaner, more sustainable oceans. But that can't get in the way of like, he's got the right product spec for his robot, and he's doing a great job in nailing that. When he pitches his business, he can tell you down to the penny the economics that the shipping company is going to make by using and deploying his leased robot. We have another company called Gen Phoenix that, if you've flown on any, but there's one airline that still doesn't use their products, but they basically take all of the waste. I didn't know this, but in a tannery, there's like a lot of the hide of a cow that is not used in leather goods production goes right into a landfill. And this company based in England takes all of that scrap and through a proprietary manufacturing process, shreds it and then reconditions it into sheets of leather for a circular economy play. They're in 4 of 5 airlines. Chances are you sat in Generation Phoenix's leather seats, and now they're moving up market. Coach just launched a new handbag with them. The launch was called Coachtopia, which is completely sustainable, recycled leather product. That business doesn't get to say that they're sustainable or they're part of the circular economy without meeting cost and reliability points that the airlines expect to last 7 to 10 years, putting butts and seats in the air. Or Coachtopia, even though it's a premium brand and consumers are willing to pay a premium for a sustainable product, don't suddenly turn around and say, I'll pay you 30% more for your leather equivalent. So they had to actually nail the manufacturing economics of this process to have a business. And I think I just, really want to reiterate in both of those examples, the entrepreneurs have big visions and they're incredibly passionate and exciting to listen to, but they really get into the nuts and bolts of like a product market fit or the economics of a manufacturing process, because they're competing against products that don't have that orientation. And you don't get a pricing premium typically in those markets because of that. You have to compete, side by side with the existing solutions.
I just want to reiterate that your sustainability can't be a perk. It has to be a part of the core value.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I go ahead and take questions? Yes, let's hear some questions.
Okay, so mine is kind of okay, I don't come from environmental background at all. I'm a PhD organic chemist. I'm a
That doesn't make you a bad
Global-
person.
global medical product developer. No, but I know, well, okay. So there are kind of 3 different climate pieces towards what my little company is wanting to do. And I don't know the words to use. So so we're going to solve superbugs. We're going to replace antibiotics with biodegradable proteins. So it will end the collection of residues of antibiotics in the soil and the water and plant supply and food supplies, because our stuff breaks down to amino acids and small proteins in short order. So what would you call that? I mean, we're not gonna clean the earth and the water of the existing residues. We're just gonna end that industry product category so that then there won't be pollution created from our stuff. Our competitors will be bacteriophages and IgMs, other biodegradable things.
I think there's a
Anything-
very common, I don't know if I have a label for it. Maybe you guys can help me with the label, but there's a very known and growing category of safe, green, environmentally conscious materials that deliver a performance attribute, but are just better for the environment. As an example, we have a company that is called Hue that hopes to deliver an indigo dye that's completely organic to the market. So every pair of jeans in every closet in the planet will be blue, but not dyed with
Right.
very dangerous
I've seen
chemicals.
them out there in California, I think.
Yep.
Anyway, okay, so not polluting, I guess, kind of would be.
Yeah, the category Hue like technically falls into is synthetic biology that is using those types of processes to build more
Yeah,
sustainable
okay,
materials.
so there's that. And then I don't know, we don't know how to do this yet, but our production process, we believe, will either be carbon neutral or maybe even carbon negative. So that's one thing. And then amongst all biodegradable things capable of destroying bacteria, ours is the only one that's room temperature stable. So I'm calling this in use. So we know we're the low carbon in use product because ours can be shipped and stored at room temperature. The other biologicals are all require cold chain or frozen chain. Is there a different word for cold chain when it's got to be frozen versus just?
I think it's the right word.
It's just all-
You're
It's just your
you're
supply
using a
chain.
lot of
Just call 'em all
refrigeration
cold
to move it
chain?
around. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
okay, so I know, I mean, so I know that I'm calling in use. But anyway, so
Those are three good attributes.
Also, I would say, in having many conversations, you'll find out the terms, but also do not be afraid to create a term within reason. So when I say create a term, you can be very product or sector focused. So in the first example, if your target was to transform certain types of biofilms or biofuels, you can use those terms alone and say, we're in the transformative biofuel sector. And if anyone says, what is that? You define it, and then they will either know what that is and then give you the proper term, or you will start having those conversations where you realize no one else has coined this term. So you find other people who are in it. Yeah, so just be very either product focused or sector focused, and you'll kind of be able to amalgamate a lot of the common terms within either the product focus or the sector focus. And eventually you'll have a Markovian walk into something that clicks and is already termed. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you can start with your own wheel and then find the right one.
So, just a small anecdote. My father used to work for ExxonMobil, and there's a phrase that constantly gets bantered around in oil and gas.
Mhm.
The secret to pollution is dilution.
I sometimes say we're ending the damage that my colleagues in the chemical and pharmaceutical industries have caused over the last few years. We're
Yeah,
not
you did start
remediating
with
it.
superbugs.
I like it.
Hi, my name is Kevin. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Kevin.
I was wondering, do you know any resources people can go to learn about sustainable solutions, sustainable innovation? Where can we really understand sustainability in different contexts and, identify some of the players in the market who are going to be big or even little guys? Thank you.
Oh, I got lots.
I was gonna say, I know you're the moderator, but how about you answer one of these for us too?
Yeah, absolutely. So I
I didn't mean to
what
cut
I
you off,
did is
sorry.
before this panel, I actually conversed with a ton of environmental and sustainability VCs just to get a grasp of what founders should be looking at from an early stage. So circular economy is a principle that's just recently coming out, and it's being discussed more and more in terms of cradle to cradle. So a lot of people talk about cradle to grave, but now circular economy principles like the tannery,
Mhm.
I don't know what that's called.
Gen Phoenix.
Yeah, that one
Yeah.
is cradle to cradle. So
Same thing with the mining business.
yes.
Circular economy for tailings as well.
Ooh, wow. Another thing is carbon tax credits as well. So carbon tax credits is something that's a little ambiguous at the moment. It's being pushed by the government more specifically, but for founders, it's a really creative method to actually get some creative funding. In terms of resources itself, there's the UN sustainability goals. Then there's also like Greentown Labs has a bunch of resources. The Engine, as well as some VC firms that are here in Boston as well, really harp on sustainability. I know at Babson it was talked about meticulously all the time.
Also, don't be afraid of the internet. I think that YouTube is actually an excellent resource because many organizations put up their non-proprietary information that can be really the first level of schooling yourself before you either A, get a certificate or a degree, or engage in an incubator or an accelerator. So teach yourself first.
And so I was gonna say, like, thank you for that, the conceptual type of perspective. But I was looking more from like a concrete, like this business is innovating, and like specific examples of like sustainable development products. So like we can understand the concepts, but how do we find the people who are actually executing those concepts?
Start with Greentown Labs.
I was going to say Greentown
Yeah.
Labs is a good one.
Greentown Labs has a huge network of companies in there and resources. So like if you're actually looking for like who's doing it, that's a good local place to start.
So typically whenever I'm networking with people, it's never about the first conversation. It's always about who is in your network, because since you're the sustainability VC, I want to hear about your friends. Who is it that you're chatting with on a regular basis? Who is it that you're getting drinks with? Who is it that you're talking about my business with?
Yeah.
I want to meet them so I can answer those questions.
Just a heads up, we have 10 minutes left and we have one question here.
I know I talk too much. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. I just like it jumped and I didn't know what kind of engineering it was. Is it related to a building or a software? My name is Demet Gresa. I'm a founder of Genome to Life for women healthcare, femtech company. On the other side, also I have an interest in Eco Village building. And I did my research, and then the only place that I know of near Mexico, around Taos, there's a self-sufficient building, eco village type of thing, just home-wise and living-wise. And I was very surprised that there was nothing available in New England. That's something that I am looking for, because I got a land in Colorado and Taos that I'd like to build something on it. But as you know, it's quite a bit of distance, even though my son is going to be in Arizona. My question is, are there any availabilities around here for Eco Village, building sustainable living and teaching, just like the model that they established in New Mexico? Because the regulations and requirements are different. And do we have standards in Massachusetts, in Vermont, maybe New Hampshire?
Yeah.
Just clarify something about that question. Are you trying to build a village in Colorado with your land? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but is there anything available here? Then I have a land and a permitting, but it would be much actually easier to build something around here, maybe west of Boston, towards Springfield, or up north. So what do you know about it? And then who I can speak with? And this is my card, if you can.
How do I answer this?
I was going to answer it from a networking perspective.
Yeah,
Again,
it might even remind me something.
so just to reiterate, I would start with Greentown Labs as a way of actually starting that conversation. So what you're talking about is specificity. A lot of investors, Ben and Vic, are perfect examples. I don't think that this is exactly in your wheelhouse. So the way that I would approach it, especially from my company's perspective, so remember, I'm creating a 25% more energy efficient CPU cooling fan. How many investors actually have the industry experience in CPU cooling fans? None. So the way that I would approach those conversations is I would say, do you have anybody in your network that you think would be really good for me to chat with? So start with Greentown Labs, find the perfect, well, I wouldn't say perfect person. I would just say, talk to the receptionist and say, I'm doing this. Who do I need to talk to be able to move my conversation forward?
Yeah. I would also actually reach out to local government as well to find out land property ownerships and what is available for community ownership essentially. So what is those called? So the word that I'm looking for, every city has one, and for some reason it's escaping me. It's not, it's often part of their city regional
Urban
planning.
planning.
It's part of their urban planning divisions, and it's called a not a community output center. But the point is, anycity.gov will honestly be your first place to look. If you're thinking about Boston, this is just my opinion, you may have a tough time with large metropolitan cities that are considered green/gray. You might have a better time in Vermont, in Maine, in doing something like that. I wouldn't say it's impossible in Massachusetts, but the land that is sequestered for community usage, whether it's for green parks, green spaces, or larger municipalities like nearshore wind or anything of that effect, you will still find it through the blank.gov route. So I would genuinely start there. Oh, that's what I was saying. The reason I mentioned that for Massachusetts is because a lot of the land that's already sequestered for that has been accounted for, like very much has been accounted for. The same thing for New York City. But by looking outside of those places, you may have a lot of luck. No, not luck. A lot of support. New Mexico and Arizona also have a few initiatives as well. I still can't remember the name of. It's part of the.
And I got a bunch of books on it, how to, reuse, because they are using water 4 million times. Totally self-sufficient that you get solar energy, you get the water utilized.
Oh, you're talking about impact investing as well. So impact investing is a completely different investor to speak with as well,
Yeah.
especially from a sustainability perspective.
When I said eco village is going to provide those education, I used to teach us because some kids don't know how to grow something. So they
Understood.
It's just like growing and farming.
There's a
Yeah.
guy sitting right there that you should talk with. It's the guy in the it's the Atlas Urban Farms sweater. So we have about 4 minutes left. There's one thing that I would love to end the conversation with. Is there anything that we can do to help you this next week? It's the same question that I end basically every single meeting that I take. Is there anything that we can do to help you this next week? Yes.
I'm looking for grants in the short term.
SBIR is going to take you 9 months.
SBIR stands for.
Oh, that's
Small business innovation research. Small business innovation research. So they
Small Business Innovation.
very well developed program,
It's
but
great.
longer, 9 months probably to apply and get the resources, but a great program.
there's
Small Business
Yes.
SBIR. Yep.
And then you might also want to take a look at STTR as well, which is going to be 9 months as well. Any grant is going to be 9 months.
STTR.
How about USDA loans?
USDA loans. Why would you get a loan with the interest rates right now?
Grants a good way to go. Hmm.
Yes.
Just on the topic of grants, since someone brought it up, for Vic, you mentioned about on a high level and in your experience only, or what you've seen or your opinion, you mentioned about some of the pitfalls of SBIR, STTR.
Yeah.
Like it's not free. The government, like, yeah, they want to see you commercialize it
Yeah.
and, have some, and you fit the criteria for like impact, the 3 criteria. So what were the pitfalls that you mentioned, or if you have expanding on that, any general advice?
So for SBIR and STTR, I highly recommend, if you have the time and energy, and if your company falls within the scope of what they are asking for, definitely apply. So when I say pitfalls, I'm saying founders should just be ultimately very aware of what is that called, in the fine print. So
Can I give him an example?
yeah.
So if you
Today.
take
I'm
government
just kidding.
dollars, you take government dollars and build your product, the government can retain manufacturing use rights for government purposes. So for example, if they wanted to
Licensing.
use Justin's fan for a bunch of servers in the Pentagon, they could just do it.
And I wouldn't have any rights to be able
Sure.
to negate that.
But Justin may not want to supply fans to the Pentagon.
I don't want to do that
Yeah.
because I have something against defense contracting.
And
I don't.
I
but
will
Justin-
say, I will say, not all SBIR or STTR grants are equal in that way. But that's why I put a very general blanket statement of be aware of the ownership of your IP, of your trademark, of all of that, because just as what Ben has mentioned, there is a trade-off to getting that money, as well as the ultimate use of what your company is able to do.
I think that's to Vic's point, a footnote. Those are good programs. Like it's
Yes.
just something to be
They're
aware
great.
of.
Again, I
They're
say
really
they're
good.
amazing. But one thing I will say about them again is you really do have to assess if your company is in the scope of what they are asking. SBIR and STTR grants are very, very specific on their RFPs. So it's not just a suggestion. They actually really are looking for exactly that. And if you don't fit that mold, then you're 9 months down the drain.
No, they'll take your proposal, but they won't reach out back to you. It's like
Just won't get funded.
yeah, you won't get funded, but you can resubmit it. Okay, we're done. So just in terms of last minute words, there is a statement. So we're all engineers here. If you haven't made a $300,000 mistake, you're not an engineer. You guys have any additional questions? I'm definitely here to chat.
Calculated per definition, right?
Oh, absolutely. All the time.
Because it is just mathematically, it's just in your hand, so just like somebody can calculate.
That's my
Thank
favorite
you
thing
very
about
much.
manufacturing.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you off because we have our virtual folks that will be automatically cut off.